Quilt Monkey is brought to you by Aurifil Italian thread, perfectly suited for all your quilting projects, and Lessien.
Hi and welcome to Quilt Monkey. We're now on series 3 of Quilt Monkey. Can you believe it? It's fantastic. And alongside our fabulous thread sponsor, Aurifil, we've now got a new fabric sponsor, Lessien Fabrics of Japan. And if you've watched Quilt Monkey before, you'll know that Nick and I are already huge fans of Lessien fabrics, and we use them quite a bit anyway. The quilt behind me was made from their First of Infinity collection, and Nick recently made a log cabin quilt using their modern basics. So we are already huge fans, so we're super excited to have them on board with us. We've got a lot of fun projects for the coming shows, and we're going to kick it all off with some pre-cuts, starting with the sushi roll. So most of the big manufacturers use these pre-cuts. They're either strips or squares, the whole fabric collection together in one handy bite-sized portion, if you like. And Lessien, for their 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips, are called a sushi roll, which is a really fun Japanese take on this idea. It's a great way to get all of the fabrics within a large collection in a nice, affordable, easy way. And they're all pre-cut for you. It's a good way to start off buying, especially something like basics like these ones. If you were buying them individually, it'd cost you an absolute fortune. But just using the 2.5 inch strips, you've got a lot of fabric for not so much money. And also they just look really pretty stacked on a shelf. So we've got that to start off with. I'm going to be making a quilt using 2 different blocks. So I'm going to use 2 jelly rolls. You can actually get a small baby quilt out of 1 sushi roll. 1 sushi roll will make you a quilt that's about 42 inches by 56 inches. So it's quite small, but it's big enough for a baby. So I'm going to get myself prepared, gather all my supplies, and I'll be back in a sec. So we're going to make a quilt over the next 2 shows. And this one, we're going to make this completely strip-pieced postage stamp style block. So with lots of different squares, but it is completely strip-pieced. So it's quite easy and fast to come together, especially if you chain piece. In the next show, we're going to make this complementary block, which again is completely strip-pieced, same way, but we've obviously got different combinations of fabrics and strips for this one. So this one is a little bit more labour intensive. This one we're going to start off, ease you in nice and gently, something nice and easy. So with the 2 sushi rolls, you get a 70 inch square quilt. So that's a decent sized quilt from just 2 sushi rolls and a little bit of yardage. You can, like I mentioned before, just make this single block. You'll get 13 blocks from the single sushi roll, and we're going to use all of those in this quilt. But if you wanted to make a baby quilt, then you could use 12, 3 times 4 formation, and it would be about 42 inches by 56 inches. So not huge, but big enough for a baby. So with your sushi roll strips, they are 2.5 inches wide by around 42 inches long, so the full width of fabric. When you're sewing these together, if you sew the full length together, what you will find, particularly when you're sewing in sets like we are with this, we're going to sew sets of 7, you will find that you kind of veer off a little bit. It's a little bit like when you're driving a car. If you don't concentrate completely on the road straight ahead of you, you kind of veer off a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. And it's the same with sewing these strips. So my tip is cut them in half. Just need to do that with a pair of scissors. Just snip at the fold. They're already folded in half anyway. It's really easy, just snip, snip, snip. That way, you've got 2 handy things. You've got more variety, so more possible fabric combinations, which makes it look more like you've pieced individual squares than strips. And also, you're going to get less of that curve. You might still get a little bit, especially when you're on your 12th strip set and you're getting really fed up. But by that time, if you've sat there, you deserve a medal, and you don't want too much of that curve going on. So I like to match my strips using the selvage. So stack them up with the selvage edges next to each other. That way you've got a nice straight edge for sewing your strips together, and the other end is going to be ever so slightly different with the length of your strips. But then you've got a nice straight edge, which makes it a lot easier when it comes to pressing and cutting further down the line. Another thing that I do is I don't really think too much about my placement. So I'm literally going to have this stack next to my sewing machine, picking up my strips, sewing them together, and end up with a really nice wide variety of colours and fabrics. And there's less of a plan involved, but I think it's a much more enjoyable way of sewing a whole bunch of strips. So I'm going to crack on with getting on with that, and then we'll start cutting. So I'm now sub-cutting my strip sets into 2.5 inch sub strips. So I've trimmed off the selvage edge or the little messy edge on the other end, and I'm just lining up my ruler, making sure that I've got 2.5 inches and that I've got a nice straight line on my seams. What you may find, because we've been sewing strips together, and like I mentioned before, you get that slight curve, you might not have an exact match on every single seam. Don't worry too much about that. When you're sewing your blocks together, or once you've sewn them together as well, and you're doing the pressing, you can kind of manipulate a little bit if you've got a slightly wonky seam or point. It's not something that you need to worry too much about right now. If you've got a massive difference between your one strip and your next strip, then just straighten up your edge like so, matching up your lines, straighten up one of the edges, and then start again. But try not to do that too much, because you don't have a lot of leeway in the strip sets. You need to get 8 of these sub strips out of each of your strip set. As I'm going through, I find to get the best variety and not confuse yourself too much when it comes to piecing the blocks is to stack everything up in nice tidy piles. And that way you can grab from each pile when you're piecing your blocks together. You can put them together in little sets, and poke a pin through the top of each set so you know that that's what you're going to sew together. So once I've cut this, and like I said, you want a total of 8 of these per strip set. And that will give you enough from your 12 strip sets. You'll have enough to make the 13 blocks that we need for this particular quilt. Last one. You can just chuck that little bit away. Now I've got all of those. I've already gathered together 6 other strips. And I've got my block here. So you can arrange it turn things round. Pressing your seams open is a good idea because that way you're not relying on which way the seams sit. So you can go, yeah, I like that one there. Again, try not to worry too much about placement. You know, just make sure that you've got everything, you know, kind of generally happy order, and that there aren't two of the same fabric sat together. But other than that, try not to worry too much. You're going to be here forever picking fabric combinations, and this is going to be a busy quilt. You know, this is a lot of dots in this particular sushi roll. So I've got a lot going on with this one. I don't really need to worry if I've got two slightly similar fabrics sat next to each other, you know, or there's a grey and a black next to each other, or two reds next to each other. So we're not going to worry too much about that. Then once you've got your block in an order that you like, stack it up, take it to the sewing machine and just sew them together. You can also, if you like, chain piece. So get a whole set of different blocks and then sew the first two together on all of the blocks, second on all of the blocks, third, and so on. That will also speed things up. Once you're all pieced, give it a good press. Use a little bit of spray starch if you want, if things aren't behaving too well. Give it a press, stack them up and keep them nice and safe for the next time when we will be making this block to go with your fabulous postage stamp block. So I shall see you next time on Quilt Monkey.